What does the return to school during the COVID-19 pandemic look like? I'm Shanda Gallego here at the Prospect Primary School with an inside look into their state of readiness in the age of the coronavirus.
I'm going to be a little distant from you so that we can take our masks off.
That's perfectly fine.
As normally, if we're moving around the corridors, we would be insisting that you wear your masks, hence our no mask, no entry sign. But for this, and in order to be able to hear me, I'm going to take it off. We'll keep a little bit of distance.
Totally understand. Principal Reed, how important was it for you in the school to create a unique guidance document? I know the Minister of Education, Honourable Juliana O'Connor-Connolly, along with the Department of Education Services, they recently toured the various schools across the Cayman Islands, specifically here at Prospect, and they were able to see how exactly we're going to be positioned and situated for our kids. So how important was that to create the guidance document unique to your school and to your students?
There are certain key concepts that have got to be common to all. And for that guidance, we've got guidance from the Chief Medical Officer, we've got guidance from the government on opening schools. But you're right, we have to make it unique to the schools because each school is different. I mean, our smaller schools in the East End can do things differently to us. We are a completely enclosed building with 28 pupils in most of our classes, so we can't operate in exactly the same way as the school next door that don't have such large class sizes. So we know our building, we know how we can make it work within a set of rules, and that's what we've had to do.
Okay, and I know the minister actually came right in when you were doing the preparations. So I know that there's still a little bit more finishing touches that we have. So let's talk about the measures and some of the, additional measures that have been put in place to ensure that when these kids come back to school, they're back in a supportive, nurturing, and safe environment.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest changes is going to be, as a visitor coming to the school, once the children are back, this is as far as you're going. Because once we go past this point, it's going to be staff and students only, because we want to limit the number of people that are coming into the building.
Thank you for joining us. Let's talk about these additional measures, and I know that's unique to each school, right?
Yeah, what we've done, we've taken an integrated approach across all schools throughout all 3 islands. We have standardized signage on the ground indicating the 6-foot distancing throughout the corridor, and also for the plexiglass, we're installing plexiglass barriers at all reception stations throughout the whole of the schools. There's a little backlog of plexiglass, but in the event we'll have some plastic or something else that would substitute that until we get the plexiglass on island.
All right, now walk us through and how our kids would be able to navigate throughout the school with these additional measures.
Now, we've spent the entire summer getting every inch of the building cleaned and sanitised, so the building's absolutely sparkly, and what we can't do is have an influx of a huge number of people coming in and potentially bringing the virus in with them. The rules as they come into school, everyone moving through the corridors, as you see, is masked up, and as they move through the school, the expectation is that masks are on and we keep 3 to 6 feet apart as we're moving through the school, and we make sure that we're not colliding classes and that sort of thing. As we go into classes and the children are sat down, and there are desks, and I'll show you a classroom in a moment, the classes are set up to be socially distant. When the children are sat down and they're working quietly, at that point they can take their masks off as well, so that they can take part in the lesson and they haven't got their masks on for the entire day, because that would be a bit much for them.
So we're still having ongoing works go on as we walk. So you'll see desks being moved, you'll see desks being cleaned and that type of stuff.
Okay.
What we will ensure is in place is that the students know that we only have 3 people at a time in the bathroom. We'll be drumming home to the children that when you've been in the bathroom, normally you'd be washing your hands, but at this point you're doubly washing your hands to make sure. The children will have spacing out in the corridor here to remind them that if there are other people in the bathroom, they wait and they go in, so there's only a couple in there at any point.
So as we enter this sign as standardized, 3 foot.
Keep your distance.
Keep your distance. And then in every classroom, there's 3 foot from end to end. So basically, it's about 5 foot total of social distance.
Okay.
All desks are being wiped down twice a day. When the kids go out and they come back to have their lunch, we'll have them wiped down again.
And what I'm really pleased about today is that we're allowed to once the children are sat down, they can take their masks off during lesson times so they can get on with their work, and that's really great, because I know that's been a bit of a worry for parents. and it's really going to help the children as well, because our youngest one's sitting there for 6 hours a day with a mask on is going to be an awful lot to ask. So it's going to really help. I mean, we do want to try and keep it as normal as we can for the children, but obviously moderated by keeping it safe at the same time. So we're going to divide up the playground so that each year group has its own, or each class has its own area. So they can come out, they can have a bit of a run round.
And Mr. Gardner, you were mentioning about the outdoor provisions.
Mainly we have some waiting areas at front. When the kids are dropped off in the morning, they'll be separated between the 3 areas. And also at each exit point and entry point into the building, we've removed the water fountains and installed hand sinks. We're having dispensers to dry your hands and also soap to wash your hands installed. That's going to be installed shortly. But at the water fountains on the outside of the building, we're going to replace with this type of system.
Mr. Ray, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's talk about the canteen services and how food will be consumed and how food will be served.
Sure, definitely. The good thing about the canteen service is that it was one service that really had the protocols established long before we had any issues with regard to COVID, because typically canteen servers would be in a position where they would have been covered with masks, they would have used gloves, they would have sanitized the dinnerware that was being used. So all of that will continue. The key part that will be quite different is that meals themselves won't be served within the cafeteria area. They'll be served within the classroom, right? And some schools may have all meals picked up for class and taken to the classroom. It may be a case where students are coming and collecting meals and going back to the classroom, but that's up to the organization of the school and how best they do it. But the important thing is that it'll be covered meals, and the eating of the meals wouldn't be in the cafeteria space itself.
Thank you, Principal Reed, for just giving us a little bit more insight, and Mr. Ray to you as well. But I'm going to stay with you a little longer because I know that there is some measures and protocols for new school bus transportation.
Absolutely.
So we're going to head out and check the school buses for some of those measures.
Absolutely.
Let's go. Mr. Ray, I feel like I'm going back to school. It just feels like that because we're here at Barnes Bus Transport Depot, where we're going to be talking about the school bus transportation protocols. I know this is really important. So what can you tell us with this?
Sure. So ordinarily, in a normal environment, we would have had our school children just sitting on the bus and being transported as normal. With the advent of COVID, of course, we had to put other protocols in place. And the main thing that we are going to do, we're going to make sure that we sanitize hands when they get onto the bus. And the bus companies, they have their strategies of how they're going to start with social distancing. But the reality is that we can't maintain physical distancing within the bus. We would have way too many trips. It would take too long for kids to get to school. So we are allowed to have 2 per seat. But here at Barnes Bus Transport, Mr. Barnes has his strategy, as all the other bus companies do, in terms of how they're going to allocate students to seats. So I think it might be useful to speak to him.
Okay. Oh, wow. So we have their markings.
No, we have this marking for a reason. You know that it's 2 to a seat, but we start with not with the X's. When you see the blank, you can sit there. Mr. Mark will sit on the other side.
Okay.
And then who else? Animal come. Then the next student will sit here. And then the next one will sit here until the bus is full up down. So the bus will be sprayed out. That will be before each pickup. And after we drop the children off and let them off at school, then the bus boy or the driver will sanitize with a little hand beer.
Yes, because they touch a lot of different places.
Anyway, that we will do that each time before the bus go back out. Now, when the bus go ready to go back out for the second pickup, we'll do the same thing again. And each entrance for the bus, children will sanitize their hand. And the bus warden sits here, the driver sits there, nobody sits across from the driver. So the driver will have no connection with the children, only the warden, unless the driver have to get involved in something.
Basically, Shanda, I think the important points we making sure that not only the students, but the bus driver and the bus warden are kept safe. So the disinfecting, the sanitization of hands, the X's on the seats to kind of demarcate where students should sit initially until the bus fills up. All of these are protocols that we're putting in place just to make sure that we keep everyone safe, spaced as much as possible for the initial part of the trip. But as more students get on, we are allowed, we've got clearance from public health to allow 2 per seat, provided that masks are worn constantly throughout the trip. Mr. Barnes is just one example of a number of dedicated companies that we have providing this service to our school children. When we think of the responsibilities of teachers, the responsibilities of special support aides, teacher assistants, any staff in schools, the reality is that the very first interaction that students have with anything school related, for most of them, is the school bus, because the school bus picks them up first in the morning. Yeah. So this sets the tone for the rest of the day. Parents
are very concerned with this step. Like you said, it sets the tone for the day and for these kids. So seeing it and having that visual, it helps parents and puts them at ease, knowing that, hey, my kids, I'm sending them off for the day, and they can be confident that they're in good hands.
Absolutely.
There you have it, an inside look into the state of readiness into our government schools in the age of coronavirus. I'm Shanta Gallego.
The COVID-19 pandemic is affecting everything from forest cover and marine pollution to the behavior of wildlife, but most of all, of people. Me, you. After Hurricane Ivan, Caymanians discovered we are vulnerable to calamities we thought only happened elsewhere. We were reminded then, as we are being reminded now, that we are resilient. We are powerful. We are community-minded, Caymankind. For the people of the Cayman Islands, moments of crisis also present opportunity. We are the narrators. You are the catalyst for change. You are responsible. This is not just our pandemic story, but it is the story of how 3 tiny islands came together to change course in uncharted waters toward greater national solidarity, functionality, and pride. Me. You.
Helping children cope during the pandemic is important. Remember to lead by example and take care of your own needs too. To support your child, listen and acknowledge their fears and questions. Provide clear information and be aware of your own reactions. Help children by creating new routines, limiting their exposure to media, and encouraging them to talk about what they've seen and heard. For free and confidential support, call the Mental Health Helpline at 1-800-534-6463.
The coronavirus has caused our most vulnerable to feel isolated and lonely. Due to their age and the probability of having underlying illnesses, our seniors rely on family and friends for comfort. You can help protect our elderly by sharing your love from a distance by following these helpful tips.
Remaining at home can lessen the possibility of contracting the virus and passing it on. Reach out to nursing homes or those in assisted care by sending homemade cards, artwork, or handwritten letters. Call your elderly family members often and stay on longer. Read a book or watch a show together while on the line. Gift books, games, craft supplies, a deck of cards, or maybe a puzzle to your elderly family members.
There are many resources that can help us care for our elderly. For a list of these, please visit www.gov.ky/coronavirus or call the Older Persons Helpline at 1-800-534-2222.
What does the return to school during the COVID-19 pandemic look like? I'm Shanda Gallego here at the Prospect Primary School with an inside look into their state of readiness in the age of the coronavirus.
I'm going to be a little distant from you so that we can take our masks off.
That's perfectly fine.
As normally, if we're moving around the corridors, we would be insisting that you wear your masks, hence our no mask, no entry sign. But for this, and in order to be able to hear me, I'm going to take it off. And we'll keep a little bit of distance.
Totally understand. Principal Reed, how important was it for you in the school to create a unique guidance document? I know the Minister of Education, Honourable Juliana O'Connor-Connolly, along with the Department of Education Services, they recently toured the various schools across the Cayman Islands, specifically here at Prospect, and they were able to see how exactly we're going to be positioned and situated for our kids. So how important was that to create the guidance document unique to your school and to your students?
There are certain key concepts that have got to be common to all. And for that guidance, we've got guidance from the Chief Medical Officer, we've got guidance from the government on opening schools. But you're right, we have to make it unique to the schools because each school is different. I mean, our smaller schools in the East End can do things differently to us. We are a completely enclosed building with 28 pupils in most of our classes, so we can't operate in exactly the same way as the school next door that don't have such large class sizes. So we know our building, we know how we can make it work within a set of rules, and that's what we've had to do.
Okay, and I know the minister actually came right in when you were doing the preparations. So I know that there's still a little bit more finishing touches that we have. So let's talk about the measures and some of the, additional measures that have been put in place to ensure that when these kids come back to school, they're back in a supportive, nurturing, and safe environment.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest changes is going to be, as a visitor coming to the school, once the children are back, this is as far as you're going. Because once we go past this point, it's going to be staff and students only, because we want to limit the number of people that are coming into the building.
Thank you for joining us. Let's talk about these additional measures, and I know that's unique to each school, right?
Yeah, what we've done, we've taken an integrated approach across all schools throughout all 3 islands. We have standardized signage on the ground indicating the 6-foot distancing throughout the corridor. And also for the plexiglass, we're installing plexiglass barriers at all reception stations throughout the whole of the schools. There's a little backlog of plexiglass, but in the event we'll have some plastic or something else that would substitute that until we get the plexiglass on island.
All right, now walk us through and how our kids would be able to navigate throughout the school with these additional measures.
Now, we've spent the entire summer getting every inch of the building cleaned and sanitised, so the building's absolutely sparkly, and what we can't do is have an influx of a huge number of people coming in and potentially bringing the virus in with them. The rules as they come into school, everyone moving through the corridors, as you see, is masked up, and as they move through the school, the expectation is that masks are on and we keep 3 to 6 feet apart as we're moving through the school, and we make sure that we're not colliding classes and that sort of thing. As we go into classes and the children are sat down, and there are desks, and I'll show you a classroom in a moment, the classes are set up to be socially distant. When the children are sat down and they're working quietly, at that point they can take their masks off as well, so that they can take part in the lesson and they haven't got their masks on for the entire day, because that would be a bit much for them.
So we're still having ongoing works go on as we walk. So you'll see desks being moved, you'll see desks being cleaned and that type of stuff.
Okay.
What we will ensure is in place is that the students know that we only have 3 people at a time in the bathroom. We'll be drumming home to the children that when you've been in the bathroom, normally you'd be washing your hands, but at this point you're doubly washing your hands to make sure. The children will have spacing out in the corridor here to remind them that if there are other people in the bathroom, they wait and they go in, so there's only a couple in there at any point.
So as we enter this sign as standardized, 3 foot.
Keep your distance.
Keep your distance. And then in every classroom, there's 3 foot from end to end. So basically, it's about 5 foot total of social distance.
Okay.
All desks are being wiped down twice a day. When the kids go out and they come back to have their lunch, we'll have them wiped down again.
And what I'm really pleased about today is that we're allowed to once the children are sat down, they can take their masks off during lesson times so they can get on with their work, and that's really great, because I know that's been a bit of a worry for parents. and it's really going to help the children as well, because our youngest one's sitting there for 6 hours a day with a mask on is going to be an awful lot to ask. So it's going to really help. I mean, we do want to try and keep it as normal as we can for the children, but obviously moderated by keeping it safe at the same time. So we're going to divide up the playground so that each year group has its own, or each class has its own area. So they can come out, they can have a bit of a run round.
And Mr. Gardner, you were mentioning about the outdoor provisions.
Mainly we have some waiting areas at front. When the kids are dropped off in the morning, they'll be separated between the 3 areas. And also at each exit point and entry point into the building, we've removed the water fountains and installed hand sinks. We're having dispensers to dry your hands and also soap to wash your hands installed. That's going to be installed shortly. But at the water fountains on the outside of the building, we're going to replace with this type of system.
Mr. Ray, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's talk about the canteen services and how food will be consumed and how food will be served.
Sure, definitely. The good thing about the canteen service is that it was one service that really had the protocols established long before we had any issues with regard to COVID, because typically canteen servers would be in a position where they would have been covered with masks, they would have used gloves, they would have sanitized the dinnerware that was being used. So all of that will continue. The key part that will be quite different is that meals themselves won't be served within the cafeteria area. They'll be served within the classroom. Right? And some schools may have all meals picked up for class and taken to the classroom. It may be a case where students are coming and collecting meals and going back to the classroom, but that's up to the organization of the school and how best they do it. But the important thing is that it'll be covered meals, and the eating of the meals wouldn't be in the cafeteria space itself.
Thank you, Principal Reed, for just giving us a little bit more insight, and Mr. Ray to you as well. But I'm going to stay with you a little longer because I know that there is some measures and protocols for new school bus transportation.
Absolutely.
So we're going to head out and check.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's press briefing. I'm Donna Bush. I'm so glad that you could join us here on all of our channels. To begin, we go to today's prayer with Pastor Mike Irby.
Father God, for today, I want to pray verse of the day, Romans 12:21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So today, Father God, we pray that we'll be all about being good, doing that which is good and pleasing in your sight in everything we do and say. I thank you, God, for the good position that you've put Cayman in terms of recovery, 100% recovery from COVID, God, and I thank you that we're in a good place here. God, we can say that you have healed, Father, you have blessed, Father, for many have done what they could do on their part, but only you could bring healing. So, God, we continue to pray for wisdom and guidance amongst our leaders, people in places of position. God, I pray that you would help us to overcome our fear by faith in you, Lord. God, who is able to accomplish all things far more than we ask or imagine. And God, you put us in these good positions. You have allowed us to have wisdom, God, and we pray for continued wisdom for all in places of leadership, for all of us as we work together. Father, we know that there's evil all around us, but today you've reminded us that we overcome evil with good, that which is good and pleasing in your sight. And God, if we're wondering what's good, we can live according to the standard of your word, the Holy Bible. So God, help us to have that as our standard for how we live life together and to trust you for what only you can do in delivering us from evil. For you're a good, good Father. And today we say thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Pastor Irby. We welcome our panelists, starting with His Excellency the Governor, the Honourable Premier, the Honourable Minister for Health, and the Honourable Minister for Finance. With us in studio are the Chief Medical Officer, the Director of HMCI, the Sign Language Interpreter, and members of the media. They join us once again this week. We go first to Dr. Lee.
Good afternoon. PCR tests since yesterday have shown one positive result in a traveller who was being isolated in the government isolation facility, and that positive result was amongst 385 results as a total of yesterday. So there are 384 negative and that one positive. That brings the total number of positive cases throughout the islands to 209 to date, with 4 having been on Cayman Brac. 4 people are asymptomatic and isolated. There's been no uptick in the number of calls about influenza. As you know, COVID-19 is a highly contagious communicable disease caused by the SARS-CoV virus, which is a notifiable disease in the Cayman Islands, and it was placed on that list in February of this year. Its ability to be very infectious is a key to its success, and we've seen the World Health Organization warn of alarming transmission rates in Europe. And we've also seen an uptick, certainly in the United Kingdom. At the moment, the weekly reported cases are now higher in Europe than during the pandemic's peak, and it's seen to be a very serious situation that's currently unfolding. I'm pleased to report, as many of you will have seen in the press, that the first run-through of the processes of reopening our borders were trialed yesterday at the airport, where 29 people went for home isolation and were all treated to the bracelet for security as well as a PCR swab on their arrival in the airport. And I received the results of those swabs yesterday evening, and I'm pleased to say that all of them were negative. I'd really like to extend my huge thanks to everybody who has worked incredibly hard up to this point for the trial. We know there's a lot of hard work ahead, but it was a big day yesterday that we managed to do that for the first group of people who have gone through the process. I've received praise from both returning residents and also from a member of the air crew, so a lot of people have said that they found the experience comprehensive, very understandable, easy to follow, and have appreciated the care that was taken of them. Infection prevention and control is absolutely paramount in the control of COVID-19. Most junior doctors, when that word is mentioned, IPC or infection prevention and control, and knowing that they have to go on a course, would like to run a mile, because they'd really do anything else and sit down whilst Sister Smith tells them what they have to do, how they have to keep their hands clean, how they have to distance themselves, how they have to wear masks, how they have to handle gowns. But it is absolutely crucial because this disease is so highly infectious. It's the key to success. So one of the things that I noticed yesterday was that we need to continue our training of everybody that's involved in the process to make sure that they understand how to protect themselves and how to protect other people from the transmission of this virus through good infection prevention and control processes. There is certainly a lot of lessons to be learned from yesterday, and we will be going through a debrief process on Monday next week and be learning from our experience on yesterday in order to improve, and this will be a continual process as we go along. One last piece of information that I wanted to let people know about, because it's pretty key, is the fact that people have been saying, what about deliveries? What about when people come to people's doors, when they're delivering to people who are being geofenced at home? And the Department of Health, I'm pleased to say, is working very closely with the people that provide food through delivery services and through the supermarkets, so that any form of food delivery service to the home, the people that deliver that will have gone through a system of education so that they can provide the service in a contactless way, essentially, so that either the payment has been taken up front on the phone or is done through contactless means, and they know how to leave whatever they're delivering at the front door and not actually engage or enter the premises. That's pretty key, obviously, to stop any interactions with returning travelers, but actually it's a safety for all of us. So they'll be they'll be instituting that process right across the board across the islands. Some people involved in those industries might not know about that yet. This is work that's actively in progress at this moment. Thank you, Donna.
Okay. Dr. Lee, we're going to now ask members of the media for any questions that they may have for you. Wendy?
Thanks, Donna. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Dr. Lee. The testing at the airport, is that rapid testing?
No, the testing at the airport is our usual PCR testing. We took the samples, obviously using all appropriate infection prevention and control methods, and then transported those samples to the laboratory to be tested there. As everybody is going into isolation anyway, I don't feel there's a need to do it immediately at the point, and we can ramp up the numbers that we're testing much easier using the larger machines that are in both the laboratories.
So effectively, those 29 people went to their homes before they had those results?
That's correct.
What's going to be the protocol if someone turns up positive on that first PCR test? Will they be allowed to remain at home, or will they have to go to government quarantine?
As you know, currently, people who are positive are kept at home. So they will continue to be kept at home. That is the plan under the but they will shift sort of from the management by the surveillance team to being looked after by the public health team and monitored much more closely from the health perspective when they move into that category. You'll know that now currently people will go into isolation and don't have a test until the 14th day. So in many ways, we are trialing this system of testing initially to see whether it reveals any additional information, for one, and for two, also because this whole process is a trial, we're using as an extra layer of security, as one of the many different layered things that processes that we have in Sept to keep the population safe.
Can you explain the difference between what you said was the surveillance team and then public health?
So Dr. Tasha Garcia-Ebanks is here, who has been heading up the whole process. She is here to answer any detailed questions you'd like to ask about the home isolation program. But the surveillance team is not medical. They will be monitoring the output from the bracelets. There's a dashboard there that they will see, and any alerts that the dashboard sends up, they are able to respond to, either initially themselves or through the police, should that be necessary.
Okay, so who does the actual random checks? Would that be public health or the surveillance?
I'm going to hand that over.
Actually, yeah, quite a few of these questions might be.
Related to that? Okay.
So, because they're about
Thank you.
How that works.
Dr. Ebanks.
Thanks, Dr. Ebanks. So, if the bracelet goes off, so a member of your team will go to the premises?
Yeah, so we've got a monitoring team that's monitoring the dashboards 24 hours a day, 24/7. They're monitored by 911. Protocols for responding to those alerts have been established, and a team of what we're right now calling mobile compliance officers, they will then respond to any non-law enforcement related alerts. Any law enforcement alerts will be responded to by the RCIPS.
When they get to the airport and they get given the bracelet, how are these bracelets programmed? So are they all the same, or do people get different parameters depending on the size of their properties?
So the actual geofence perimeter is set once they arrive at their location. So it depends on their accommodations. One of the things that we're doing over this testing period is to work on the configuration of that geofence depending on the type and nature of the accommodations. Obviously, for security reasons, we can't delve into the details of the configuration of the technology, but that's one of the pieces that we are testing.
So if people are fortunate enough to have a beachfront property and a swimming pool, their swimming pool would be included perhaps, but not necessarily the beach?
Yeah, so looking at creating that geofence, yeah.
Sorry. Okay, that's it. The only one I had actually was just the active cases for Dr. Lee, which was the 3, we now have 4 active cases. The 3 are well past the week, so it's 3 weeks since they first arrived. If you could just clarify what the situation is with those original 3 that tested positive over a week ago.
There's no change in our process for that. If ever we have somebody that's identified as positive, they will automatically go into a quarantine period of at least 10 days, depending on whether they develop any symptoms or not. At the end of that 10-day period, they'll get their negative test. If they develop symptoms under that, that will extend their period until they get their negative test. So as these people have been asymptomatic this whole time, when they reach the end of their 10-day period, they'll be tested, and if they're fine, they'll be released.
So effectively, even you said that like one of those cases that the person had a very, very low viral load when they actually did test positive, but yet they still have to stay that full 10 days regardless.
The moment we identify a case, we treat them as if that is the time at which we identify that they are COVID positive, and that's the time at which their quarantine due to the infection begins.
Okay, great. I think that's all I have. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Lee. Just to carry on from where Wendy stopped off with the positive cases, you had indicated that there were 4 cases from the BRAC. I've gotten a couple of questions asking whether this 4th case come from, because initially we had identified 3 cases from the BRAC. Can you just clarify that for the public?
That case came up a few weeks ago. And was somebody who was being transferred on medical grounds.
Okay, so are you still continuing active screening on the sister islands as you are doing here, the retesting of individuals and stuff like that?
I believe they should be. I don't know. I don't think Dr. Williams is on the line because he's on holiday this week, but I would need to clarify absolutely. Certainly we are here. I would assume they are doing so, but can't give you absolute categoric confirmation about that.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
We're doing that across all of the hospitals here as well as at the ports. We're calling sort of sentinel testing so that we continue to screen in case anything should come up.
Okay, so just to get back to the process for the border reopening and the rapid test, at what point are you going to trial that part of the border reopening? Because we're just doing the PCR testing at this point in time. When can we expect the rapid?
I don't really see a rapid test necessarily per se for its speed as producing any increased safety, because we can turn around our tests fairly quickly. You saw that I had the test yesterday for the people that came back on the BA flight. We can turn around tests probably, if we really put our foot on the accelerator, in around 2.5 hours. So many countries, they have a problem because some people are having tests and they don't have their results for several days. Hence the requirement for a rapid test, because they know that when they get their swab done, they're going to be waiting for a long time. In Cayman, we don't really have that problem. We can certainly return a result very quickly should we need to. There may well be a difference if we change the technology such that we can do point-of-care testing or testing which doesn't require very specialized equipment, or testing that could be done in a hotel or in a doctor's surgery. And many of those tests are likely to come from slightly different techniques which don't need the same degree of technology going into them. And that will probably be a game changer unless the vaccine gets here first. For example, this new test the UK has been talking about, the Lamport test, that testing ability has been hailed as great. It needs a lot less equipment, much more mobile. The problem is they're not able to ramp up the manufacturer enough or have enough of them in enough places in order to change something at the moment. Time will tell as to what's going to be here to help us quicker, really, in this regard.
Okay.
Some of the antigen testing as well. We've talked before about antigen testing, and the antigen testing is proceeding quite well. So the antigen testing is getting better and better and better. However, a report again from the World Health Organization released, I think maybe 5 days ago, has said that although in many cases antigen testing may play a role, if you have access to readily available PCR testing, you should stick with PCR testing. And certainly if you're looking for surveillance where there is a low level of COVID, you should stick to PCR testing. So for the moment, we're sticking to PCR testing.
I'm just curious about the process when we come to the border reopening. For that window from the the testing to the results, will individuals have to remain at the airport, or will they be allowed to go to their isolating venues first?
That's looking quite a long way forward. So we haven't agreed that any of that's going to happen. All of that would be agreed, first of all, by caucus and cabinet. And then we would iron out the details, and I'd be able to come back to you and speak to you more in detail if it was to be agreed.
Okay, understood. Thank you. I just have a couple of questions in relation to the surveillance. I just wanted to find out what's the quota that you have arranged for the surveillance team? How many people do you have logged that are dedicated to monitoring these individuals who will be home isolating?
So right now, as of today, we have 8 individuals. It's headed up by CBC, so we've got a supervisor from CBC that's leading a team. This is part of the testing, and part of this testing over the next couple of weeks is to determine what level of resourcing we need, and also then to give us some time to acquire that resourcing. This team is testing out the protocols that have been developed and the processes that have been developed. They're doing, in addition to responding to alerts, they're doing random checks of homes just to check in with families. Part of that is just as a supportive mechanism so that these individuals aren't alone, but also just as a compliance mechanism, surveillance, to make sure that they also know that we are watching. And there is a requirement to comply with the COVID regulations, and we want to support them in doing that. And so having these random checks is helpful in that regard as part of our multi-layered approach to this.
Okay, thank you. So you also mentioned the non-law enforcement aspect. What about the law enforcement aspect? When does that kick in, or how does that process work? Because we had new regulations that were published yesterday, and it included police powers as well. So can you explain that?
So where there's a breach a breach of the geofence, or where there's any kind of breach where we suspect it's a violation of the COVID-19 regulations, because it's 911 that's doing the monitoring, and they're actioning any of the responses to the alerts, notifying the relevant teams, they will then notify the RCIPS, and that's where law enforcement then will get involved in the process there.
Okay. Now, we had a comment come in from the public on yesterday's process and the selection of the individuals who were going to be participating in the home isolation program. Can you say why it was such a small net? Is it because you just have 8 people doing the monitoring right now, and at the next flight you're going to increase that? Because there were some people who wanted to participate in the home isolation, and they were told that, well, you can't right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, limiting it is part of kind of the overarching obligation that the government has to protect the country. And so ensuring that the sample group was large enough that it could serve as a good test, but also small enough that we weren't unable to then provide for the services and the needs of the group and protecting the country at the same time. So all of the infrastructure that's being built to support this program is all being put together now. And we've got 2 weeks to October 1, which is actually less than 2 weeks really, which is not a lot of time. And so we wanted to ensure that the group is small enough that while we're testing that group, we've also got people then that are building out the rest of the infrastructure. So looking for additional resources as part of that compliance team. We're working with Cayman Airways to look at seconding some of their staff who are not yet back to work to utilize as part of the travel management system. So right now travel time is being delivered by one of our ministries, and that's not something that can continue on forever. And so looking at building out the travel management processes, the team that's going to be leading that going forward on October 1, as well as setting up call centers for October 1 when our numbers are going to be, a lot greater than 29 people being at home. So it's about managing our resources and ensuring that we can protect the country while we're doing testing and building out for October 1.
Okay, my final question. To what extent can the public assist in the surveillance aspect of it? Is that part of your vision, or am I getting too far ahead?
Well, I think that's something certainly, if the public were to be involved, something certainly that Cabinet would have to give us direction on in engaging the public. And our hope is that by creating a system of support around travelers who are coming home, giving them resources that they need, as Dr. Lee spoke about, we've given them communication around when ordering, use contactless, delivery companies that use contactless services. Certainly public health, as he shared, is doing a great deal of work with companies that do deliveries so that that can be a safe process. So I think by supporting persons in self-isolation and being successful in self-isolation, having a call center to call if there are challenges or issues. The call center is also going to make random calls to them to check in on them. They've got a lot of communication before they came. They're going to be getting communication over the course of their 14 days so they don't feel alone and wondering, well, what's next? What's happening? I haven't heard from anybody. And as we shared, we're going to have our mobile compliance team making random visits. So I think our perspective is that if we support them in being successful in their responsibility to isolate at home and to comply with their commitment to doing so, that there won't be a need for the general public to have to help to surveil that group and to provide a compliance function. So it's about trusting on the one hand that people are going to do the right thing, and on the other hand making sure that they have the support and the systems to help them be successful in that.
Okay, I know I said that was my last question, but you also raised another point, the mental health aspect of home isolation.
Yeah.
Is that going to be part of I know you touched on it, but we all went through the lockdown. There were periods of isolation where, you needed that extra helping hand. Will you be partnering with any of the mental health organizations on island to kind of give that extra support as well as, apart from the surveillance teams, just asking, how are you doing today?
Yeah, so interesting. That actually came up at a meeting with HSA earlier this week, looking at the telemental health services to ensure that persons do have access to that level of support. So there are still arrangements that are in place post our shelter-in-place provision. So we're looking to see if that's sufficient or if we need to increase those. But yeah, exactly to your point, that's why we're having, the call center doing some call and check-in so that people aren't alone. And also they've got, right now, the group that's in home isolation right now, there are 2 phone numbers that they can call, and they've got access to people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if they need to call somebody. So yeah, that's certainly something that's top of our mind.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lee, Dr. Tasha, and to members of the media. We're going to go now to the Honorable Premier for his remarks.
Hello, everyone. I think a lot of the things that I am going to cover now have been addressed in one way or another by Dr. Lee and Dr. Garcia. But as a former minister used to say, repetition bears emphasis. I'll start with an update on the BA flight that landed yesterday and the commencement of the home isolation trial. Yesterday's flight provides us with an important opportunity to extensively test the individual components of the phased opening of our borders program prior to the 1st of October. The BA flight arrived yesterday carrying 95 persons. A total of 29 persons from 12 households who arrived on the flight were onboarded onto the home isolation program, with the remaining passengers going into a government-managed isolation facility. The home isolation participants are required to wear an I'm Safe smart wristband, quarantine in residential or other accommodations approved by the Medical Officer of Health, undergo COVID-19 testing upon arrival and again on day 15, and remain in quarantine for a minimum of 14 days, after which a negative test result and sign-off by the Medical Officer of Health will be required prior to receiving clearance to go out into the community. The participants were also provided with an information pack that included quarantine at residence general information, food, medication, and essential supplies purchase and deliver guidelines, useful contacts, for example, the travel support team and the flu hotline, prescription refills, supermarkets and restaurant directories, isolation guidelines from the COVID website, managing COVID anxiety, again from the COVID website, managing mental health for young adults from the COVID website, and pen, notepad, thermometer, and first aid kit provided by HSA. The I'm Safe technology solution developed by TraceSafe has been procured for the testing program and the October pilot. I'm Safe is marketed as a, quote, complete, intuitive solution for self-quarantine management, unquote, and has been used in Hong Kong as part of their COVID-19 strategy. The solution includes a lightweight, hyperallergenic, waterproof, latex-free, hospital-grade wristband, a mobile app for users, and a web dashboard for the monitoring station. It provides automatic location monitoring and reporting, giving alerts and notifications to authorities for efficient quarantine management. The complete solution comprises the following key components: a smart wristband that wirelessly communicates over Bluetooth Low Energy and associates the traveler to the custom mobile application, a hub, an Android or iOS phone that transmits information from the smart wristband to the mobile phone and then to servers which continuously analyze data received and trigger alerts and notifications, and a monitoring station where alerts are received via the web dashboard and processed in accordance with established protocols. Pre-selected participants were identified based on established criteria, from travelers approved by Travel Time to travel on a BA flight. A variety of different types and locations of accommodations were chosen to help test how robust the technology is under different circumstances. Once they had been processed at the airport, all of the persons selected for the home isolation trial left the Owen Roberts International Airport for their approved home isolation in an authorized taxi. Taxi drivers were given the location of the isolation and were advised to take travelers directly to their location, making no stops on the way. Yesterday, all travelers reached their home isolation location. The monitoring team was alerted and the geofence was established. The monitoring team is alerted if someone leaves their isolation location. In addition to conducting testing with travelers off the 17th September BA flight, testing of the interaction of the I'm Safe device with the alert handling infrastructure is also being conducted with participants who are not travelers, that is, civil servants and others working with the September testing team. The Department of Public Safety Communications, known as 911, is responsible for monitoring the dashboard and actioning any alerts based on established protocols. A mobile monitoring team has been established. This team will respond to any non-law enforcement alerts and conduct random home visits to travelers in home isolation. A traveler support team will check in with travelers via phone and are standing by to receive calls from travelers should they have any questions or problems they need support with. Changes were made yesterday to the control of COVID regulations to address any breaches of home quarantine in particular, including the issue of persons who are in isolation permitting other persons to visit them. Persons found to have committed an offense against the regulations will face a fine of $1,000 and possible imprisonment for up to 6 months. On another matter, all of the, 95 passengers mentioned previously applied, 94 of the 95 passengers mentioned previously applied to Travel Time, and after being vetted by CBC, were provided personalized letters authorizing their entry into the Cayman Islands. However, one passenger who did not receive approval from Travel Time and who was arriving as a visitor was processed by CBC and was placed straight into quarantine and departed on the outbound BA flight earlier today. It must remain clear to all that our published policies will be enforced. No one should arrive on island without the necessary approvals. The safety and well-being of everyone who lives in our islands is paramount to this government. As I've said before, we will not rely solely on technology, but also back that up with boots on the ground. And we will continue to watch and monitor this trial very carefully. That's the BA flight and the trial process. we will see that the Minister of Finance is here, and I do not wish to steal his thunder. He will address the issue that we've spoken about for some time, that is the arrangement of a contingent or standby loan facility for the government to help see us through whatever the length of this pandemic actually is. I also have a very important announcement, a matter of national importance really, with respect to the proposed constitutional changes. But I'm proposing to deal with that after the rest of my colleagues have addressed the COVID-19 issues, so that I can then take questions with respect to that, along with questions generally relating to the COVID-19 management process. Your Excellency.
Thank you, Premier McLaughlin. Your Excellency.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I also have some comments on the constitutional change issue, but I will leave those now until after the Premier has done his at the end. So, I mean, first of all, as we've heard, the quarantine at home trial using the BA flights got off to a really good start. So again, let me add my huge thanks to the Civil Service team led by the Deputy Governor and Dr. Tasha and so many others for the enormous amount of work that they have done on that. And a reminder that there will now be scheduled fortnightly BA flights from October until the end of November. I do want to acknowledge that there are concerns about the situation in the UK, which is worsening as it is across the whole of Europe. The UK Health Minister said today that this is a big moment for the UK, and I know that consideration is being given to additional nationwide measures to restrict social gatherings, but leaving schools and offices open. And this is probably intended to act as a circuit breaker on the infection spreading further and trying to prevent an increase in deaths from COVID. And I do think it's relevant to us here that all the evidence in the UK suggests that COVID spreads most in social gatherings. There's much less evidence for spread in schools and workplaces. Many countries are experiencing continuing challenges with COVID, but it is a reality that we have to try and find a way to live with this virus and get on with our lives. And I think it's therefore hugely important that we have put in place a very significant set of mitigations to manage the risk we face from incoming travellers, which remains significant from the UK, US and Jamaica. All the various measures that you've heard about today that have been put in place amount to a significant package. In fact, I would probably say there are probably very few other countries in the world that are going to these lengths to protect their population, particularly our elderly and vulnerable. So I do believe the community can take some confidence from the care and attention that is going into this. We need to continue to proceed carefully and cautiously, but at the moment we remain one of the safest places in the world just to be just now. And I know everyone on this panel and across the civil service is determined to keep it that way. But as everyone has constantly underlined, we should all remain alert and not let our guard down. We've lifted most of the restrictions, but as our Chief Medical Officer has repeatedly said, we can still take sensible precautions. Hands, face and space remain the key going forward to protect ourselves. So we need to continue with good basic hygiene, wear masks where you're asked to do so, stick firmly to the regulations around social gatherings. And again, I just want to underline just how impressive our testing has been. And as Dr. Lee has said again, we do have the capacity to ramp up testing very quickly, up to as many as 3,300 tests a week if we need to do so. And also, the quality of our testing continues to hold up extremely well. And we know we compare favourably because we're in touch with PAHO, the regional WHO body for the Americas, but also more recently, and I'm told through a HSA interaction with the WHO, which again reaffirms the very high quality of our testing. So again, that gives us confidence we can deal with whatever situation we might face and quickly isolate any outbreak of cases. But we had a case today, so we must bear in mind it's inevitable we will have more cases from travellers or even community transmission going forward, but we are ready to cope with it. And I want to just make a plea today on a separate issue for everyone in our community to treat everybody with courtesy, dignity and respect. I know that dealing with this global pandemic has created its own unique stresses and strains, and that we've all felt that despite our favourable circumstances. But I've seen a number of comments made on WhatsApp in recent days about the Civil Partnerships Bill, which I feel are deeply irresponsible. In fact, I find them quite shocking. The worst ones have been referred to the police to look into. I'm not going to single out individuals or organisations, but I call on both sides of this debate to lower the temperature and please think twice before posting anything on social media that will offend others in our community. And just think about the damage you're doing to our international reputation before posting some of the comments. We're known to be a community of Caymankind, but unfortunately a small number of people in our community are falling below acceptable standards of behaviour. I will comment on constitutional change a little bit later. Finally, just very quickly, I just want to say I've been asked by the Cayman Regiment to note that 2 more Caymanians are going to London today to Sandhurst for junior officer training, and we have just started the recruitment for reservists, the next batch of reservists. So I do think it's a really exciting initiative and wanted just to underline that on behalf of the regiment. Thank you, Donna.
Okay, thank you very much, Your Excellency. Minister of Health.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everyone. Grand Cayman, Cayman Brac, Little Cayman, and our Caymanian diaspora listening in. As we continue to prepare our phased reopening and now our testing of the systems to be put in place, we rely heavily on the science of it all and the experiences of other countries' trials and tribulations. We pray we get it right, but as you can see, there is a risk. But our job is to pay attention, listen and minimize the risks, and to trace and control as quickly as possible. Today's scripture readings from Proverbs 3, 5-6. Trust in the Lord with all thy heart, and lean not on thy own understanding. And in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path. Shout out today, happy birthday to my son, Zachary Seymour. And also want to offer my condolences to the McBean family. They lost their mother. Also wanted to note a concert tomorrow, Saturday the 19th at 7 p.m., dubbed Grateful, celebrating God's mercies during COVID-19 thus far. We'll be singing testimonies, food, singing from the Williams Quartet, Impulse Band with Rex and Lammy, and Jay Prophet, and many, many more singers and entertainers. Quincy Brown should be emceeing that. It's at the Cowood Beach, so come on out. As the number worldwide cases has grown now to over 30 million, I want to start today by thanking God for his continued mercies on our islands. The devastation in the U.S. has been almost unbearable to hear about, and we must stay united in our faith and continue to practice good hygiene measures and wearing masks and visiting the vulnerable and elderly. We'd like to remind the community that face masks are still required at all HSA locations, including district clinics. They are also still required at police stations and care homes, and also at pharmacies. The most recent regulation states wearing of masks, Section 5.2a, that a healthcare facility may require that any persons who visit any of such places shall wear a mask, and a person who refuses to do so shall be refused entry. I wanted to take the time to share this as the HSA is still seeing a lot of patients arriving without masks. I would also like to congratulate the HSA team who came together to successfully run the COVID-19 testing pilot program for the BA flight yesterday. It has taken a lot of manpower and organization from various departments, senior management, public health, health information management, facilities, IT, the lab, just to name a few. We have been able to take away so much from our first run through, and overall it went very smoothly. Dr. Lee also met the arriving passengers yesterday, and so many have reached out to say how grateful they were to see him there. I also wanted to remind the community that as of September 4th, the Department of Environmental Health has revised their post-COVID-19 lockdown hours at the Georgetown landfill. Their operational hours are as follows: Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday, 7 a.m. to 1 p.m., and closed on Sundays. The 24-hour landfill drop-off will remain open 24 hours a day, accessible to the public for the disposal of small quantities of garbage. Lastly, I would like to address some of the talk around flu vaccines and questions whether we should get one or not. According to the CDC, it's likely that flu viruses and the virus that causes COVID-19 will both spread this fall and winter. This means getting a flu vaccine during 2020 to 2021 is more important than ever. While getting a flu vaccine will not protect against COVID-19, there are many important benefits, such as flu vaccines have been shown to reduce the risk of flu, illness, hospitalization, and death. Getting a flu vaccine can also save healthcare resources for the care of patients with other severe illnesses of COVID-19. Flu vaccines can reduce the risks of flu-associated hospitalization for children, working-age adults, and older adults. As I've mentioned several times before, this should be coupled with policies that allow unwell employees and students to stay home, whether to work from home or rest. It is important preventative tools for people with chronic health conditions. For example, flu vaccinations have been associated with lower rates of some cardiac events among some people with heart disease, especially among those who had a cardiac event in the past year. They can also help reduce worsening and hospitalization for flu-related chronic lung disease, such as in persons with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD. According to the CDC, flu vaccination also has been shown in separate studies to be associated with reduced hospitalizations among people with diabetes and chronic lung disease. Flu vaccinations helps protect women during and after pregnancy. Getting vaccinated yourself may also protect people around you, especially those who are most vulnerable and whom have made great strides to protect. Despite the many benefits offered from flu vaccines, not everyone will go out and get one. However, as we approach the flu season and prepare for flu vaccines to soon arrive to the Cayman Islands, we must be mindful that the flu still causes many illnesses, hospitalizations, and in some cases can cause death. With a vaccination, we continue to protect our people, the elderly, and vulnerable even from the flu. Public Health will be announcing the flu vaccine program in October. God bless.
Thank you, Minister of Health. And last but certainly not least, our Minister of Finance, Mr. McDaniel.
Thank you, Donna. And very good afternoon to everyone, both viewing and listening public. As the Minister for Finance and Economic Development, I am very pleased this afternoon to inform the public that the Government of the Cayman Islands has awarded the provision of a standby line of credit to a consortium of 4 local retail banks. The consortium is comprised of the following banks, with each committing to provide the following amounts: CIBC, First Caribbean International Bank, US $115 million, or CI dollars $94.3 million. Bank of Butterfield, US $143 million, or CI $117.326 million. Cayman National Bank, US $115 million, or CI dollars $94.3 million. And RBC Royal Bank Cayman Limited, US dollars $30 million, or CI dollars $24.6 million. A total of US $403 million,
or 330.4 million CI dollars, is being made available under the line of credit. Any use of this line of credit will be converted to a long-term loan facility with the consortium, and therefore the same US $403 million amount is available under the long-term loan facility. CIBC First Caribbean International Bank is the structuring and administration agent for the consortium. Butterfield and Republic Bank Limited acted alongside CIBC First Caribbean as lead arrangers. The tender process for the facilities commenced and concluded with the Ministry of Finance's Entity Procurement Committee's approval and the Public Procurement Committee's review and scrutiny. The terms submitted in the bid are keenly competitive. These facilities demonstrate that the government of the Cayman Islands continues to be regarded as a high-quality sovereign, as is reflected in our Moody's rating of AA3. The tender followed all required procurement guidelines, and it is very pleasing to me that we are seeing local commercial banks come together and submit a single bid to the Cayman Islands government, thereby demonstrating their confidence in the government and the country as a whole. This is a win for government, and it is a win for the people of the Cayman Islands. I just want to reaffirm the sentiments that will be attributed to the Honourable Premier in the written press release that will be issued after this briefing. And that is this government's strong fiscal management, with past healthy annual surpluses, paying down debt and growing our reserves, has placed us in a better place than most countries. The government doesn't say this to be boastful. We're making this point to acknowledge our own gratefulness for our past efforts, which we see now bearing fruit for us today in allowing us to safely and quite stringently to face the challenges of COVID-19 from a financial viewpoint. Whilst we have access to the line of credit, we do not expect to need it or expect to use it before the end of the second quarter of 2021. In effect, this is a much-needed insurance policy for the Cayman Islands. I would like to thank the Financial Secretary, the Accountant General, Deputy Accountant General, and the Ministry's Entity Procurement Team for the stellar job in getting this line of credit and a long-term loan facility in place. I must also recognize the important and independent role of the Public Procurement Committee, the PPC. They scrutinize the proposed decision and endorse the conclusion to make the award to the consortium. The PPC is an independent of the government. An appropriation for a possible $500 million borrowing will be presented to the Legislative Assembly at its next meeting and to the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office for approval prior to accessing any of the funds from the line of credit. This appropriation will include the $330 million CI loan under this line of credit, as well as provide government with the ability to borrow an additional sum of up to $170 million if it becomes necessary. The $330 million and the $170 million will make up the total of $500 million CI that we will be seeking approval for. At the expiration of the 18-month line of credit period, any amount advanced and unpaid under the LOC will be converted to a 15-year fixed interest rate amortizing loan with the consortium banks. Both the line of credit and the long-term loan are priced at 3.25% per annum, the current prime rate offered by local banks. The cost to put the line of credit and the long-term loan facility in place will be approximately $2.4 million US. Any use of the funds will address needs resulting from government's loss of revenue and its increased expenditure related to COVID-19, particularly increased expenditures by government to support the vulnerable in our community and business entities across the islands that have experienced financial hardship as a result of the pandemic. The government considers the award to be an important milestone. It is another major step in having assistance on hand to help the islands, its citizens, its residents, and businesses to recover from the economic and financial hardships caused by COVID-19. I also have some very positive developments to report this afternoon concerning the delivery of mail from the United States. The Postal Service has been working tirelessly for several months to make arrangements for the resumption of mail service from the United States. Many of you will know that transportation of mail between the United States and the Cayman Islands is a contractual matter for the United States Postal Service. I am pleased to announce this afternoon that the United States Postal Service and Cayman Airways have finalized a contract allowing our national carrier to transport U.S. mail into the Cayman Islands. The first shipment of mail will arrive on Monday, 21st of September. The Cayman Islands Postal Service will make every effort to sanitize the incoming mail and have it sorted into Grand Cayman post boxes by Wednesday, the 23rd of September at the latest. Any U.S. mail to Cayman Brac and Little Cayman will also be processed expeditiously for onward transport to the islands. The USPS, or U.S. Postal Service, has also advised that they have updated their systems, lifting the restrictions on mail to the Cayman Islands. What this means is that Cayman's mail from the U.S. will no longer be returned to sender by the U.S. Postal Service as a result of any previous COVID-19 restrictions, but will in fact now be forwarded to the Cayman Islands. I wish to thank the Postmaster General, her deputy, postal staff, and the management of Cayman Airways for all their efforts in making this possible. I say to them, very well done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister McTaggart. Premier McLaughlin, did you have something to say before I move on to the media? No.
I want to, if you don't mind, to address the constitutional matter, and then we can take questions on everything. I think everyone will recall that in December of last year, the Legislative Assembly debated and unanimously agreed to support a package of constitutional reforms contained in what was then called the Cayman Islands Constitution Amendment Order 2019. This package of reforms was negotiated in December of 2018, but unfortunately became bogged down in London as issues with Brexit held the attention of the UK government. Later, the UK elections, and more recently, the management of COVID, understandably, were the main focus of the UK government. Nonetheless, I continue to follow up, either with the governor or directly with the minister responsible for the overseas territories, whenever we had the opportunity to speak. I spoke with Baroness Sugg at the end of August, and she indicated then that the package of reforms was being considered, but that one change in particular would not likely go forward. But she agreed to provide confirmation along with a new draft order in council as soon as she could. I am pleased to announce today that I have now received confirmation from the Minister that the package of reforms is moving forward as an amended draft order in council, which is entitled the Cayman Islands Constitutional Amendment Order 2020. In her letter to me, Baroness Sugg noted that the draft order in council will be sent shortly to the Foreign Affairs Committee for 28 days and then to the Privy Council. She also confirmed to me, however, that the UK would not be able to include the provision which would have removed Section 81 of the current Constitution, which grants to the Governor the power to legislate where he or she considers it necessary to do so in respect of any matters for which the Governor has special responsibility under Section 55. She further noted that the decision to not remove this section was because the Governor has had to use Section 81 recently to uphold the rule of law following the failure of the Legislative Assembly to approve the Domestic Partnership Bill. Those who attended the negotiations in London in 2018, including MLA Alva Suku and then Leader of the Opposition, MLA Ezed Miller, can attest that the negotiated package of reforms, including the removal of Section 81, was hard-won and brought significant benefits to the Cayman Islands. These wins came about because the UK government recognized how far we have matured as a country and as a legislature, and in the end, had agreed to many of the reforms being sought. However, as indicated by Baroness Sugg, the new draft order in Council now does not include the removal of Section 81. I'm a pragmatist, and so I have come to accept that Section 81 will now remain in the Constitution. But I will always regret the opportunity that we as legislators and as a country have lost. Hopefully, some future government will be able to achieve what we came so close to doing. But let us focus now instead on what is still a very important and useful set of reforms that will not only advance our islands and constitution, but will provide our islands with several protections. The often mentioned Section 125 of the current Constitution reserves unto Her Majesty the power to legislate for peace, order, and good government of the territory, a provision that is common through almost all of the overseas territories' constitutions. In light of some of the issues that we have grappled with over the last few years, involving what we viewed as overreach by the British Parliament in particular, we sought to put some parameters around this provision, and were successful in getting the UK government to agree to insert a new Section 126, which doesn't exist in the current Constitution, which would read as follows, quote, notification of proposed acts of Parliament extending to the Cayman Islands, or orders in Council extending such acts of Parliament to the Cayman Islands. Where it is proposed that A, any provision of a draft act of the Parliament of the United Kingdom should apply directly to the Cayman Islands, or B, an order in Council should be made extending to the Cayman Islands any provision of an act of Parliament of the United Kingdom. The proposal shall normally be brought by a Secretary of State to the attention of the Premier, so that the Cayman Islands Cabinet may signify its view on it. This section does not affect the power of the Parliament of the United Kingdom to make laws for the Cayman Islands, or the power of Her Majesty to make an order in Council extending to the Cayman Islands any provision of an Act of Parliament of the United Kingdom, unquote. This new provision is listed at the end of the package of reforms, but I am mentioning it first, given its importance to us as a country. What this does for the first time is to put into the Cayman Islands Constitution a provision that appears in no other constitution in any overseas territory. A mandatory provision that before the United Kingdom government or the Parliament may legislate for us, that at a minimum they must consult with the Premier and the Cabinet, has to then signify its view on the proposal. This buys not only time, but the opportunity for broader consultation across Whitehall and Westminster in the UK, so that we don't wind up with situations where the United Kingdom Parliament simply on a whim can amend legislation that is progressing through the House of Commons and that has the effect of intervening in areas of domestic policy by legislating for us. Similarly, and in the same vein, is the agreement to the following provision being added to our Constitution in Section 44. Quote, for the avoidance of doubt, it is declared, subject to this Constitution, that the Cabinet possesses autonomous and exclusive capacity in domestic affairs for any matter that is not one of the following. A special responsibility of the Governor under Section 55(1). B, a function which the Governor must exercise under this Constitution or any other law in his or her discretion or judgment, or in accordance with instructions from Her Majesty through a Secretary of State. Or C, a function which the Governor is empowered or directed, either expressly or by necessary implication, to exercise without consulting with the Cabinet, or to exercise on the recommendation or advice of, or after consultation with any person or authority other than the cabinet, unquote. This new section makes plain that the responsibility for the domestic policy of these islands is a matter squarely for the elected government and not for the United Kingdom. This is similar to a provision that applies in the states of Jersey and the Channel Islands and will provide us, as it does them, with some increased insulation from intervention by the United Kingdom Parliament and indeed the United Kingdom government in areas which are devolved responsibilities of the local government. The United Kingdom has also agreed to remove Section 80, which is the Secretary of State's power to disallow legislation passed by the Legislative Assembly. This is another significant concession, even with Section 81 remaining in place. These changes are by themselves significant and will help advance our islands politically and constitutionally, giving us greater responsibility to control our own destiny. What also caps this off for me is the United Kingdom's agreement for the Legislative Assembly to be changed to the Parliament of the Cayman Islands, and that for the elected members to be called Members of Parliament. This change reflects the true standing that we will have in constitutional terms. In addition, as I've said previously, this change is hugely important when elected members are dealing with international matters, or indeed dealing with the United Kingdom government or any other government. Government officials understand intuitively that a legislative assembly is an inferior body in constitutional terms to that of a parliament. I believe it is less likely that the United Kingdom Parliament will seek to deal with another parliament in the way that, on occasion, they have dealt with this legislative assembly in the past. But besides that, this change is an important step for us, particularly as we are now also moving forward with plans to make the administration of the Legislative Assembly independent of the executive. Another important change is an additional section that will allow the introduction of parliamentary secretaries, who will be an elected representative appointed by the governor acting on the advice of the premier. Parliamentary secretaries will really assume the role or roles which councillors now have. Other important changes include the UK agreeing to amend Section 71 of the Constitution to confer the power and authority to create standing orders for the Legislative Assembly, to confer that power to the Legislative Assembly and to remove that responsibility from the governor. And Section 44(1) will be amended to allow the next government, following the general election, to increase the number of ministers from 6 to 7, plus the premier, which makes for a cabinet of 8 elected members, in addition to the Attorney General and the Deputy Governor, and the Governor as chair. And for a new provision in the Constitution to create a police service commission. There are a few other changes, mainly administrative, but in the main, the ones that I've mentioned are the significant ones. This package of reforms constitute important changes to the overall advancement of these islands, and indeed some are critical to the well-being of these islands. In addition to the unanimous support that these changes had in the Legislative Assembly, they also received the written support from the financial services industry, from the Chamber of Commerce, as well as from the Cayman Ministers Association. We can all be proud of the significance of these constitutional reforms that will help to move this country to a whole new level, where we have greater autonomy, greater responsibility, and a greater sense of insulation from international assaults on our right to control our own destiny. I wish again to thank all those who have been involved in allowing us to get to where we are today. In particular, I pay tribute to the Honourable Attorney General for his counsel and hard work, to His Excellency the Governor for his not only support but intervention on more than one occasion in moving this forward, and indeed to Baroness Sugg and her predecessor in office, as well as to the UK government in general.
Thank you very much, Premier McLaughlin, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Donna. If I could just add a few brief remarks to that. I do agree fully with the Premier. This is a really important step forward. I know there'll be a lot of focus on Section 81, so let me just say a little bit about that. I mean, I think the Premier had indicated previously that this was likely to be the impact of the Legislative Assembly rejecting civil partnership legislation. The UK needs to be able to exercise its responsibilities and international obligations in an overseas territory, and similar provisions do exist in other overseas territory constitutions. But the situation over this bill unfortunately demonstrated a need for the UK to retain this element of the Constitution at the present time. But it wasn't a decision that was taken lightly, and I think as the Premier set out the changes in the package, it shows that the UK fully supports and respects Cayman's extensive responsibility for domestic affairs. I also know that the UK has great respect for the Honourable Premier and his government in how they have addressed so many challenges in recent years and handled so impressively the COVID pandemic. It is very rare for these situations to arise. Section 81 has only ever been used once before, and the UK had to pass an order in Council for some OTs to meet international obligations to abolish the death penalty in 1991 and legalise homosexuality in 2000. But these situations are very rare. And so I'm really pleased that the remainder of the reform package is going ahead and it's on track for delivery in the next few months. And as the Premier said, it's a really good package for Cayman, reinforcing autonomy for domestic affairs, advancing our good governance arrangements and modernising the UK-Cayman relationship. So I do believe this is an important achievement, and the successful outcome reflects very well on the Cayman negotiating team, ably led by the Honourable Premier with the support of the then Leader of the Opposition, Mr Miller, and current Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Mr Suku. I was an observer at those talks, and I know that the united front presented by the Cayman team at the talks had a very big impact on the success that has been achieved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We're going to now move into questions from members of the media, beginning with Wendy from CNS.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everybody. Premier, do you have any regrets now about allowing a conscience vote for the domestic partnership bill, given that we've lost what was your crowning jewel, really, in those negotiations?
Well, I wouldn't say that was a crowning jewel. I think it's a very important provision. But no, I don't. It was a matter, I think, and His Excellency agreed with me, that it was quite proper to allow a conscience vote on a matter such as that. But in practical terms, had I not done that, I probably wouldn't be sitting here as Premier this afternoon. It would have probably brought the government down. And as tempting as that might be, and as sometimes even for me, for there to have been a collapse of a government in the middle of this pandemic, I'm not sure that would be in the best interest of these islands.
Can I just also cross that to the Minister of Health? Do you have any regrets about your decision to vote against it, given the outcome?
No regrets whatsoever. Thank the Premier for allowing us to use our conscience. I don't think that the Premier was surprised that we expressed our struggles with supporting the domestic partnership bill as it was. So it wasn't a surprise. We know we had our challenges. He did the right thing. I thank him for it.
On the sort of similar subject for the Governor, can I just clarify that you said the messages have now been reported to the police, they've been accepted by the police, because obviously when I spoke to the Commissioner, he didn't take them seriously in any way, they weren't investigating them. because there were issues that he said that were preventing them from doing so. Are you aware of that? Have those circumstances now changed?
Yes, they have. I think there was a miscommunication. I don't think all the messages got to the police commissioner first time round, but that's all been received and it is being looked at. I can confirm that.
What about the situation on the talk radio where people have been phoning in and also saying things? I think there was an incident where somebody had called in and said that all gay people should go before a firing squad. Well,
I just repeat what I said earlier. I think everyone should treat everybody else with courtesy, dignity and respect at all times, and I urge everybody to do that. I think the Muslim Imam, Mr. Chowdhury, in an interview with Compass yesterday, I thought he put it incredibly well. I found it actually quite inspiring. He said he personally doesn't support homosexuality, but his faith for him means that he loves everybody, he's compassionate towards everybody, and he doesn't allow any discrimination against anybody in our community. And I would urge everybody to approach this issue in those terms.
Thank you. Minister of Finance, completely different. Can you just clarify, when you said the cost of the loan, so just getting it set up, that's going to cost us 2.4 million, is that correct? Have I got that right? That means that's to establish it?
Yes, there are.
So even if we never touched it, we'd still have to pay that?
Yes, there are arrangement fees that have to go to the bank. That would be the majority of it, I would think.
And the 3.25%, that would be for every penny that we borrowed under whatever circumstances?
Under this term, yes, and that is fixed for the entire 15 years of the long-term loan plus the 18-month period for the line of credit. It's 3.25%.
You seem quite confident that we won't need to touch it until at least the second. I think you said the second quarter of next year.
That's what we are seeing now. And
given that it is a fairly cheap loan, and it's not, and given the circumstances, has government, I think we talked about this ages ago, but has government given any thought to growing the public sector a little bit in terms of being able to create jobs to replace those that have been lost in tourism that foreseeably could be for quite a long time now, perhaps take on some of the work that's been languishing for a long time, like, for example, the dump that still doesn't seem to be going anywhere and would create an awful lot of jobs if we kept it in the public sector rather than tendering it. So where do you sit on spending money like that?
Well, I think what we see right now is that there are a number of agencies that continue to have approvals to hire staff and take them on. And again, that's going to be more of a policy decision that needs to come to the cabinet in terms of ramping up the civil service in any appreciable numbers. I think the issue you have to look at ongoing with these things, when you start to ramp up the numbers, then it's hard, when things do get better, it's hard to take them down when those particular issues are dealt with.
Minister for Health, would you be considering a policy change to try and put the landfill completely into public hands to try and move it forward, seeing as it seems to be so stalled, and now we have this big batch of money that the finance minister's got for us?
I don't get the
landfill. It's still not really moving, like the major part of it. I know there's been some remediation, but would you consider a policy review to take that project back completely into public hands and use public money, which would obviously create an awful lot of jobs for people that are suffering at the moment? Have you considered that?
That is one consideration, but from the advanced stages that we're at now and from the progress that I've seen, I mean, we're signing off the early works now, which is next month. We hope to sign the total agreement. So we're very close in our negotiations. So I must say there's a lot of progress being made, and there's no need to consider that at this time.
When you say a lot of progress, does that mean that there is going to be work starting on the waste to energy element shortly, longly?
Well, it's a process. I mean, we need to cap and remediate first, and obviously everything else comes after that next year.
Thank you. I've not finished yet, sorry.
That's okay.
I'll try and be quick. I'm going back to COVID. I've just got a couple more questions for the Premier. Yes, the wristbands. How many did we get? And have we made a decision about how we're charging and how much and all that sort of thing? And did those people on BA yesterday get charged? The wristbands?
Well, I know the answers to some of the questions, but not how many wristbands we have. But we have Dr. Garcia here, so if you can ask her.
But what about the fee? Did they get charged yesterday, the BA people?
No, it's a trial.
And have you made a decision in future about whether they will or not? Next batch, like on the 1st of October, will people be charged?
We haven't come to a final decision, but I think the number that's being looked at is $200 for self-isolation when we move to sort of the bigger scheme. And that'll be, we think, the kind of money we need to cover the costs of the administration and looking after people in the COVID testing and so forth. But that's a whole lot less than the cost of isolating in a government-run facility. So,
just the numbers. Thanks.
Yeah, we procured 200 for the testing that's happening over the next couple of weeks, and we have 1,000 that have arrived in the Cayman Islands today. So we're working to clear those so that we will definitely have them in time for October 1 because they are on island.
When you say testing over the next couple of weeks, obviously all of those people that came in last night have already got theirs.
Yes.
So are you planning on giving them to select people coming off the CAL flights over?
No, so we have individuals that are working with our testing team, so individuals who are not travelers.
Right.
So we're using that internally. Our computer services department is testing the functionality and of the technology.
I think that's everything, but there's a lot, so I might have to come back. Thank you.
All right, Wendy, no worries. I'd like to call Reshma from the Compass next.
Thank you, Donna. No worries. There's so much to cover. I don't know where to start. I'll start with the constitutional changes. Premier, now that we have confirmation that Section 81 has been removed, are you disappointed that your efforts have now gone to waste?
Obviously, I'm very disappointed. But the 8th of November will be 20 years since I was first elected. I've had many disappointments. I'm used to them.
So I had a question come in from the public asking, even though Section 81 were to be removed or not, the UK can still impose its will on Cayman. Is that correct? I mean, even if we had Section 81 or not.
Right. So as long people need to understand this, as long as Cayman remains a British territory, ultimately the UK can make decisions. So, but the arrangement is via a constitution, which is agreed by the UK. This is how we will administer or allow the territory to be administered. So the current constitution has a provision which allows the governor to, with respect to the special responsibilities, which include defense, internal security, and sort of a general responsibility under Section 125 for good governance, to use a short phrase to explain it. So what the governor was forced to do, and I say forced to do because you cannot ignore a declaration of your own Court of Appeal. Even an independent country like the UK cannot do that. Otherwise, the whole system starts to crumble. So he exercised the power given to that office, the office of governor, under the Constitution. So the removal of Section 81 would have taken that power away from the office of governor. So the issue would have had to be kicked up higher up, which is Her Majesty and Privy Council, who would and have done in the past and continue to do, make an order which can change legislation. Indeed, the Constitution itself is promulgated and comes into effect by virtue of an order of Her Majesty and Privy Council. So, but so that would have had to be the route that the UK decided to go. And they could have done so as well, but because there was a local power to do so, that was the route down which the UK decided to go. But those who get on the talk shows and even in the House and pound the drum about the UK doing, as long as we remain a British overseas territory, ultimately, the UK has that power with respect to matters which affect good governance, matters which affect the areas of the governor's special responsibilities.
Now, the draft order is going to go to the Foreign Affairs Committee. The Foreign Affairs Committee has issued a report, I think it was last year, can't get the timeline right, but in that report, they made some serious recommendations in relation to voting rights and other issues. Are you concerned that with this draft order going to the FAC, there may be further tweaks to what the draft order is going to look like, or is it just an administrative exercise for this report, this draft order, to go before the FAC committee?
There may be tweaks. But what you're talking about wouldn't be tweaks. Those would be major policy changes. The FAC has the ability to consider matters and to issue reports, but they don't have any decision-making authority. That's a matter for the UK government itself. I don't anticipate that we will have issues. There was major concerns around the issue about same-sex relationships and partnerships or whatever, which the FAC had raised over and over again, and was seen by the UK government to be a major stumbling block. But that issue has now, some may say unhappily, but it's been resolved. So that is no longer an issue. That was the only thing that had been flagged up as being a possible stumbling block to this going through. But politics being politics, you never know. So when it's done, it'll be done. Not before that can we start to celebrate.
Okay. Now, with the withdrawal of this particular provision, I know you said it was hard fought. Does that change the UK-Cayman relationship in any way? Does it even change your own cabinet relationship, the cohesiveness, the willingness to work with each other?
Well, there's no doubt that the whole issue has created major strain. I mean, the same strain you see reflected and played out there in the broader community is the same strain we deal with within the caucus and the cabinet. But certainly, my relationship with the United Kingdom government and with the minister in particular is as good as it's ever been. So I can't tell you what my successor will do, but so far so good, as far as I'm concerned.
And internally with the cabinet, is it?
I'm sorry?
And internally with the cabinet, is it the same?
Well, we function, as I said, there are strains. Once you go through these sorts of things, it takes a while sometimes for the healing process to work. But it generally does. To answer your unspoken question, there's no danger of the cabinet or the government collapsing as a result of this.
Thank you for making it.
From what I've seen over the last couple of weeks in the cabinet and caucus and everything, it's good cohesion. No need to worry. No one in the country needs to worry about disruption in our early election, or not from our point of view. Everything is moving smoothly. Everyone's doing their job. Everyone is taking on their responsibility. And the Premier is still our commander. And we still have our admiration and respect for the Premier. And I think we need to put that to bed. There were two ministers that voted against the domestic partnership bill. And they're back in cabinet and working as usual. And no need to worry. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Minister Seymour. Minister McTaggart, I'm just curious. You sought 500 million line of credit, but you only got 403. Would that be
330 CI.
Yeah, 330 CI.
The RFP was for 500.
Right. So Would that be sufficient to keep us going, or do you envision maybe that's not enough right now?
No, I think that is, at this point, certainly for the short to medium term, it should be very, very sufficient for us. That's why I think we also said we'd go for the additional 170 million, get approval from the LA and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office for that. So that will give whoever's going to be occupying the cabinet in 2021, it will give them that additional ability to go back and authority really to go ahead and borrow money if it becomes necessary. But this really gives us a very significant cushion to continue to weather out the trials of COVID.
Okay. Would you be seeking that full amount of the for the line of credit, or do you have a set amount that you intend to draw upon next year?
We will draw upon the line of credit as and when it is needed. We're not going to draw this all down in one fell swoop once we get the approval of the LA and the Foreign Office. But it is there, as I said in my presentation, it's an insurance policy. So we will draw it. We will exhaust our own resources first. That is the reserves that we have. That's what you have a reserve for, a situation and emergencies like this. And so we will consume those first before we actually start to delve into drawdowns under the line of credit. So that would be the plan.
Okay. Do you have a set amount that you intend to draw upon first, or you're not ready to disclose that yet?
I don't know what that amount might be as and when, and when it might be needed. I'm saying from what we are looking at situation now, we might not need to draw on this now until late into the second quarter, towards the end of the second quarter.
Okay, and just to help the public who may not understand an amortizing loan, what exactly is it?
Yeah, an amortizing loan is a situation where you pay a certain pay down principal and your interest on every payment date. So an element goes to pay off the interest for the period, and you also pay down a certain amount of the principal, so that at the end of the 15 years, when the loan matures, your loan balance is zero with your final payment.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I have some COVID.
McLaughlin? I think Member McLaughlin.
Sure.
Right. If there is some massive advance in the research and production of vaccines and so forth, and COVID is no longer a major international public health issue, and tourism is able to bounce back by the middle of next year, the country may not need to use that money at all. So our present trajectory, I am looking to get through the end of this term without having to touch a cent of that money. It is a contingency or a standby line of credit. It's not, we don't want to convert it into a loan. We would have paid $2.4 million for the insurance, consider it as an insurance policy, as a premium on that insurance policy, so that we don't have to worry about cutting civil servant salaries. We don't have to worry about stopping government projects. We don't have to worry about where we're going to find the money to help businesses and the vulnerable in our community over this period. That's what it is. But we have sufficient reserves that we'll be able, if we don't get another, if we don't get tourism reopened significantly, even on current revenue that are being generated, we can get through the end of this term, we believe, without having to borrow any of that money. I hope that helps clarify how the government is dealing with this matter.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it does. Just to go to my COVID questions, please. You touched on a traveler who ended up here who was not cleared by travel time. How did that happen, and how are you going to ensure that it doesn't happen again?
Dr. Garcia, you want to take that one?
How did that happen? The passenger coming here who's not cleared by travel time, and what are you doing to
travel time. I don't. Oh. Yeah, that's being travel time.
Of the week.
Good, Dr. Lee. I don't know the answer.
I must say, before Dr. Lee speaks, there is there was some communication going on with the tourism department and the airlines and so forth that are flying or supposed to fly into Cayman even after we open up. And there was some of the airlines were not willing to adhere to some of the policies or take on the responsibility of their agents being medical, looking at medical arrangements for the Cayman Islands. So I don't think this is a situation with British Airways, but it would be very interesting to find out further how someone got on the plane that wasn't supposed to be. I would have think they would have been working from a list of approved passengers, but sometimes these things happen.
We'll endeavour to get back to you a fuller response on this matter.
So you're investigating that?
I believe I know what happened, but we'll endeavour to. I'll make sure the facts are correct before reporting to you.
All right. And did we foot the bill to send this person back home?
That'll form part of the response.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Lee. My questions now, in relation to the regulations, Premier, there is a fine that that is attached to people who are, there's a fine attached to people who breach the home isolation protocol. It's a $1,000 fine. I think previously a sum of $10,000 had been mentioned. Why the change? Do you think that that's a sufficient deterrent for people to adhere to the rules, $1,000?
No, it's not a change. This is a new provision relating specifically to allowing persons into your property who are not part of the group that's isolating. So this hasn't changed the broader public health provisions which we promulgated maybe 3 weeks ago. This is a recent change because it was identified by the team doing the work that what do we do about people having guests come over, because there was no express provision dealing with that. So this is a new provision. It hasn't changed the one that we promulgated some weeks ago.
Okay, so that one relates to people leaving the geofencing perimeter, the $10,000 fine?
Right.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. And this one, I kind of happened on this one. When I was coming to GAB, I saw some hotel execs leaving. So I'm just curious if you can give us any update on the resort bubble plans, if there's been any developments or any changes.
They're under intense discussion.
So we may have an announcement soon?
Or we may not.
I'll take that one for
now. I'm not trying to be flippant about it, but this is a really difficult area. I mean, even the hoteliers themselves are finding it very difficult as to how a resort bubble would actually work safely. So we are struggling. I mean, all of us are struggling, but nowhere in the world has successfully done this. So even places that had, what did they call them? All-inclusive resorts, because you always have to deal with the issue of the staff who have to come and work and go home, stop Foster's, buy some gas, buy Jose's, and go home to their families, go back out, hang out at Country and Western. You know, what I'm saying is people living their normal lives, you know, so the guests are there in the bubble, but it's the back and forth. You essentially have to treat them as medical workers, you know, treat their patients, you know, with that level of PPE and protocols in place. So I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's proving very difficult to work through. But the work is continuing.
Okay, thank you. I have one final question that came in from a member of the public in relation to quarantining and their family. I'm not sure if you would be the one to answer or...
About what?
Quarantining with their family, a traveler who is returning and they want to join their family at home. Does the family have to quarantine with them?
Absolutely.
And if they choose not to, can they just go somewhere else before the person arrives? And
yes,
what's the process?
as long as the family is not staying in the same place. If the family is staying in the same place that the traveler is coming home to, they're all going to be subject to the same protocols, including the wearing the I'm safe bracelet. So it's often easier for the traveler, if it's a single person, to go stay in an isolation facility and let their family get on with their lives for the duration, rather than displacing the whole family or inconveniencing the whole family for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so the question was, what's the process for them to avoid that, being displaced? Do they have to apply to travel time or reach out to government so that the family doesn't have to stick with the isolating passenger? Or that arrangement can be made before they arrive?
The passenger should go into a government isolation facility or another isolation facility which has been approved by the medical officer of health. But as soon as they go into that property, they possibly infect the entire or contaminate the entire area. And so everybody who lives there are going to be subject to the same protocols and the same requirements to quarantine.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's it from me.
Absolute final question before we wrap up from Wendy.
Sorry, I'd forgotten, and Reshma reminded me. The resort bubble, where exactly would the advantage lie for Caymanians and Caymanian workers? Because if you have, say, a resort like the Ritz, where there's no Caymanians working there largely, and no one can leave, so they can't go to a bar, they can't go to a restaurant, they can't hire a car, they can't go to an attraction, where's the advantage?
Well, I'm not sure it's accurate to say there are no Caymanians that work at the Ritz. There are a few hundred. But aside from that particular point, these hotels are continuing to pay staff and incur significant operational costs. And so we are facing the possibility of another mass exodus of people from here if the hotels shut down, as well as massive loss of continued massive loss of revenue of the hotels here. At some point, we're going to have to make some really hard decisions. I think we are in pretty good shape government-wise for perhaps another year. But people have to work. Many people are earning much less than they previously would. There'll be much less spend in the broader economy. We possibly face the situation that some of the Dutch Antilles are facing now, is we're running out of money. So we have to continue to work to find ways to bring people back here to spend money in the economy. We can't, government can't carry or help me on real carrying, can't continue this indefinitely, nor can businesses. So.
Also remember too the 13% tourism accommodation tax that the government gets from every tourist that arrives here.
Also, Premier, I think it is safe to remind the public that some 500 persons signed up last week at the hotel. Some 500 Caymanians that are unemployed signed up to be trained to work at hotels on the island.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So that wraps it up for us for today. A reminder to those of you out there who may be interested in becoming a Cayman Islands Regiment reservist, you should go online to explore.gov.ky/CI Regiment and apply there. The deadline is the 26th of September. We thank you, the public, for joining us today, and of course to our panelists and our guests in studio. We thank them for all the information that they've provided to us. A reminder to go online canteen.gov.ky. Until next week, have a wonderful weekend.
Principles remain unchanging, and they help us to maintain integrity. In other words, if we're doing it intrinsically, then we don't have to look externally for those things that might be rewarding. Okay? It is said that you're as old as your latest dream. Dreams empower us. Have some plan. In other words, if you tell your brain you're dying, it will believe you, and it will start shutting down as well. Remember also that today you might be the provider, tomorrow you might be the recipient. And as a result, we have to do unto others as we would have done to us. And lastly, do not make a bucket list, make a promise list. Because if you make a bucket list, it means that you're planning for death,